this to work. So I've written on this before, and I wanted to incorporate the discourse that I've already had on this subject. And I've also linked in the notes, in its footnote 34, the article where I discuss this notion of a race to the bottom, slavery, neoliberal politics, sort of a combination of multiple concepts. I'm not going to get into that discourse properly here, but relevant to our discussion on race is something that I had written in 2005, 6 years ago. I had written one, I was still a graduate student, and I recognized after taking a class on race theory and race that something needed to be said about how we go about enslaving the population. So the question is, how do we justify the enslavement of human beings? How do you conceptually justify, how do you sell to the population of moderates the enslavement of an entire continent of people? Well, this is how I structured it, right? So the first thing is, this is the justification. The first premise is to be human is to have a soul. To be human right? To be human is to have a soul, right? So you need a soul in order to be a human being. Excuse me. Next premise, to have a soul is to be Christian. So now we've connected the soul with being a Christian, right? So to be human is to have a soul. And to have a soul is to be Christian. The next premise is that these natives are not or refuse to become Christian. So these natives are not, or they refuse to become Christian, right? So we can arrive at our conclusions, right? 3 dots means therefore. Therefore, these natives have no soul. Therefore, these natives are not human. And in the original publication, I stopped. This is a citation from the original publication. I've given you a link to that original publication so you can read it for yourself. I would amend it now. In retrospect, I would probably put an additional premise here, right? So before we put to be human is to have a soul, I would say to be free is to be human, right? I would have maybe the caveat to be free is to be human, right? So to be free is to be human. To be human is to have a soul. To have a soul is to be a Christian. These natives are not or refuse to become Christian, so they lose their soul. If they lose their soul, these natives are not human, right? If they lose their soul, then they lose their humanity. And then I would just put the last caveat that if they lose their humanity, then they lose their freedom, right? Therefore, these natives are not free. Okay, so to be free is to be, in the original publication I didn't put this first premise because I assumed it. I probably should have spelled it out, and I do cite it later, and I'm about to read that section to you. But the fully fleshed out argument would be something like this, right? To be free is to be human. To be human is to have a soul. To have a soul is to be a Christian. These natives are not or refuse to become Christian. Therefore, these natives have no soul. Therefore, these natives are not human. And therefore, these natives are not free. And once we recognize that they're not free, right, this specifically serves, this conclusion serves as the conclusion serves as the justification for slavery. And the question becomes, how is it that, what does this justification hinge upon, right? It hinges upon their refusal, right? The idea of proselytizing, the idea of saying that we are going to spread for better or worse. And again, I don't want to hear critical critiques. This is a discourse, right? The idea is that if you are so moved to proselytize the heathen savage population, and they have their own divinity, they have their own spirituality, they have their own sort of pantheistic cosmic belief, whatever it might be, and here the white man comes in and tries to civilize their savage minds by forcing upon them the notion of Christian dogmatism. Well, obviously the people would want to reject that, right? I have my own beliefs, right? I have my own view. I have my own cosmic interpretation of how I fit into the broader nexus of the universe. And to say that that view is completely invalidated because your view is the dominant prevailing view and you also happen to have all the guns, well, of course I'm going to refuse that. So how do I justify the enslavement of these people? Before I leave to go abduct these people, before I leave to go enslave these people, I construct the argument knowing full well that a vast majority of the population is going to refuse this notion of Christian divinity, right? Insofar as they know, and we know prior, and that's important, right? Prior to the abduction of these people, that they're going to refuse the Christian tradition, the Christian conception of cosmogony and cosmology, then what do? Well, we justify the enslavement of these people, right? So what ends up happening is that these natives are not free, and insofar as they're not free, we now justify the enslavement of the population because of their refusal, right? So we need to construct this argument in order to justify the enslavement of the people, because people are going to ask, how, on what grounds are you enslaving an entire continent of people? And you say, oh, well, we gave them the opportunity to choose to become Christians, and insofar as they refused to become Christians, we are now justified in enslaving them, exploiting them for their labor, and amassing global wealth for ourselves, right? I don't know how that last part follows, right? But this is the argument, right? This is the argument. So, right on page 18, the argument that I constructed is just a brief bit that I wrote later. It is quite simple to deduce slavery from such premises, right? As slave labor contributed to the accumulation of vast wealth derived from Caribbean plantations. The original publication was on Jamaica. If the natives refuse to convert to Christianity, they cannot have souls. If they do not have souls, they cannot be human. And finally, if they are not human, then they are not entitled to be free. All right? So my argument in constructing this rather simple logical justification is to demonstrate. It's just a demonstration that we can conceptually justify the enslavement of an entire continent of people and exploit them completely and solely for their labor in the amassing of unfathomable global wealth because of a refusal. Because simply they didn't want to believe what the hegemony, the majority, those who had control believed. It's the simple refusal of to believe what others believe that was the justification of the enslavement of the population. And for me, I wanted to expel it out in its most simple and its most logical, precise formula, because it's hard to swallow, right? It's hard to swallow that we are so intolerant a species, that individuals who believe different than we believe, just on the merit of their difference, we are justified to fully exploit them. And we know the atrocities that happened in the slave trade, in the transatlantic trips that were made. We know the atrocities. All of that, all of those atrocities were all justified in the name of the failure for these heathens to believe as we believe. And I can't swallow that. I can't swallow that really is what it was that simple, right? It was that simple. But unfortunately it was. It really was that simple.